Okay, I want to thank everybody for coming today. I also want to thank Delta Blue for hosting this meetup. Uh, Bram will give a short introduction about Delta Blue. Then we will go to our first speaker. It's Maarten Scholz. He will give like a lightning talk about Command Bus. Then we will have a talk about Serkan, talking about the Command Bus, the Command Bus, about Symphony. Then we will have a short break. Then we have one other lightning talk about Jan. And then we will have a lightning quiz. So if you want, you can already install the Kahoots if you want to participate. So I hope that everybody enjoys this meetup, and then maybe Bram can give a few words about Delta Blue.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming to this meetup edition. So we're from Delta Blue. We are basically a hosting company. We have developed our own cloud platform, specially targeted to web developers and system integrators and so on, so that they can easily develop their applications, scale them into the cloud. And we do that in a back-to-back fashion with our partners. So our customers are typically, web development agencies, and our typical end customers can be small ones, like small web shops or campaign websites, to bigger customers. We run some sites for Microsoft, I think the LAN, other cool stuff. Coca-Cola we've done, Audi, all those stuff, all in partner. And Monotoad, of course. I'm forgetting Monotoad. One of our first bigger, I'll call it scale up, Chris. Is that the right word? They do a lot of traffic. So yeah, and I think we're now a team about 10, 12 people. We're hiring a lot. So if you have like DevOps skills, or you're great in application support or developer or whatever, then please come talk to us. And well, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bram. So for our first lightning talk, we're going to listen to Maarten Scholz. He's a developer with Made with Love. Together with him, we're going to take the command bus. So a big round of applause for Maarten Scholz.
Moet je hier gebruiken? Ja. Might be a problem. So hold it close, right? Okay. Good evening. Welcome to the first lightning talk of this evening. I will be talking about the command bus, but yeah, before we start, I'm gonna ask who here knows what the command bus is. Okay, quite a few people. Okay, that's good. Who here has actually used it? Okay, again. Okay, that's fine. My talk will be, it will be an introduction talk, so I will assume that you don't know what it is. But people who do know it, in the end, there are some things for you, hopefully. Before we start, a little bit about me. I've been a software engineer for 7 years now. I started as a Drupal developer, did some front-end slicing, got into frameworks due to Laravel, but the last years I mostly work in legacy, which I actually really enjoy. I'm a big proponent of domain-driven development, and I still enjoy doing some front end in React. I work with for a company called Made with Love. You might have heard of us. My boss gave a talk here a few months ago. Yeah, we do mostly software development, but we also help with product management, stuff like that, support for your development teams, or managing your development team, stuff like that. This is actually my first talk, so I hope you enjoy it. So let's start with the controller. So I'm gonna tell a little story. We have a we're a small startup, for example. We have a small CRM tool. You can add contacts there, and you have this form posts to this controller. So we have this contact controller, we have the store method. I left out all dependencies and type hints for clarity, but you get the point. So what's happening here? We're newing up a contact, and we're setting properties on them and we're getting data from the request, right? This is actually already domain logic because although it's an anemic domain model, we're actually the setting of the email first name and last name is actually already it's already that you build the contact. Distance logic, we're saving that contact to the database. Then we have a mailer because it's 2019 and we need to be GDPR compliant, so we need to actually ask them. And then we're returning, we're redirecting back. I forgot the return statement here, but yeah. And you might say, okay, this is a lot of different logic in this controller. That's true, but I would argue if you have a simple application. Sorry, I need to. I forget to speak in the mic. If you have a simple application, I think this is actually fine to have it like this. If you have one, you have a user interface, I think it's fine to have your controller just like this. But of course, then your project manager comes along and says, we want to build a public API. And that public API needs to support adding a contact. So what do? You create an API controller, contact controller. What do we have here? We have, again, the building of the contacts. We have, we're getting data from the request. Of course, it's some different data from the request. I exaggerated a little bit and put API underscore in front of the keys. Then we're saving the contact again, we're sending GDPR mail again, and this is again different. We're returning a JSON response, because of course we're in an API. Yeah. So what we have done now, of course, we have created the application. This is, of course, that it's not it's not advisable. If we now need to change something, we need to change it in two places. If we forget, then we created a bug. I work in legacy a lot, so this will happen very frequently. And if it's in there long enough, it will not be a bug anymore. It will be a feature, and removing it will be very hard. And what can we do to fix this, to get rid of this application is, of course, my talk wouldn't be about it, introducing the command bus. So let's have a look how that would look. So there we go. This is our contact controller. We have our store methods. And what we see now is we're building an add contact command. We're taking the data from the request again, and we're pushing that, or we're putting that command to the command bus. And then we're redirecting again. So how does our API controller look? It looks almost the same. The only differences here are, of course, what things that actually need to be different. Those are the fetching of the data from the request and a redirect. All the rest is the same. Of course, our logic is gone. Before we look where our logic went, let's take a look at this command. This command. So as you can see, it's a simple DTO data transfer object. It contains our email, first name, last name as a constructor, and some getters, which I left out. There's no behavior in here. This is only an object that contains the data that our application needs to execute that that particular behavior at the adding of a contact. So where does this go? It goes to here, our add contact handler. So this has a handle method and it takes our command. And this is where our logic went. So we see again the building of the contacts, but now the the properties are fetched from the command. So they're abstracted away. We don't have a request in there anymore. We're saving the contact repository again, and we're sending our GDPR email again. So this is where all our behavior went. So of course, let's now talk about the command bus itself. So we have our command, we have our handler, and in between there's our command bus. I'm not going to show code for the command bus. It's not that hard to write yourself, but I wouldn't recommend it. There are enough packages to, which will do that for you. I personally prefer Tactician from PHP Limburg. You might, some frameworks have it built in. For example, Laravel has Laravel jobs, I think. But yeah, so it does only one fairly simple job. Take that command and match it with its correct handler. That's actually the only thing it does. There are some, it has some wiring in between, like naming conventions. So if you add this contact, where will it find your handler? That can be folder structure. There are some different ways. In Tactician, for example, you can configure that all yourself. So what we can do now, we can add, of course, different handlers. So it's important to note each command always has one handler, which will always be executed. In that case, it's different from, this might look like, for example, an event dispatcher. But in this case, an event gets dispatched and might have 0 or, let's say, 10 handlers or listeners. In the case of a command bus, you always have one handler. So another thing, so this is our command bus. So something I like about this is that you have this nice overview of behaviors, your use cases, your application supports. So we have this add contact, we can edit the contact, we add a contact to an event, a calendar event, for example. But what you get is this nice list of behaviors that your application actually supports. What I used to do, if I get put into a project, what I mostly do is go to a controller, go to the controller methods, try to check out what the application does from there. If you use the command bus, you can actually, I try to look at the commands, and I think that's a really nice benefit. Okay. What we just done is, or you could say, why don't we use like something like a contact service, for example, and just add a method add contact on there, which you could have done as well, of course, or an event service or a calendar service or something like that. So the one thing that the command bus does is is this one central place where all your use cases of behaviors of your application will go through. So in the case of Tactician, you can add middlewares to that. So there's a middleware stack in between. What does that mean? That means that you can extend, you can add middleware. So your project manager again comes along, or support comes along and says, oh, we want to have a log of everything that user has done or something like that. You can add a logging middleware here, which will actually log each command that your application has done. It will log the parameters, the time that it's logged, and stuff like that. Something else that's very common is a transaction middleware. So you wrap all the behavior that's in the handlers gets wrapped in a database transaction. If there's an error, it will be rolled back. So that's something that can be added in the command bus. So that's something you don't need that you now don't need to manually add in all the handlers, for example. And you can add as many as you want, of course. let's talk a little bit about some higher level stuff. So what we have actually done is build a service layer. I'm going to not spend too much time on this, but I'll quickly go over this. So the actual pattern we built is a service layer, and what is that is a boundary or a layer between your outer layers, like your user interface, your API. If your project manager asks, we can add a CLI, and the core. And the core of your application. Whatever, it really depends how your core looks on which architecture you use, but if your models, your application logic, your domain logic will all be in there. So that command bus fits nicely in between and will actually act as the boundary. So that will help that you will never leak like an input layer logic into your core and vice versa. So what we have actually done, the example I gave, is we have added a service layer, which is the actual pattern, as a command bus. That's what I mostly wanted to tell about the command bus and its pattern. I'm going to talk a little bit about pitfalls. The first one is, I like to call something generic commands. So we have this add contact command, we have this add contact handler, we have a command bus in between. Now your project manager comes along and asks for an import feature, for example. What you can do, of what maybe I have done myself, is added a script somewhere, a controller or something, and looped over the contact data that needs to be imported, and fired off add contacts commands for each one. But then, of course, your project manager comes along and says, yeah, okay, those are already GDPR approved, you don't need to send that mail. So what do? You add a flag on this add contact command, like from API, from import, or of don't send GDPR email, or something like that, and you wrap the sending of the mail in your handler. That's always if you're adding Boolean flags to your command, there's always a flag that you actually need another command. So if it's a different use case for your users, you should add another command for it, and handle it in that commands handler. If you have shared logic between handlers, you can create abstractions there, but keep that logic on the handler side. Don't combine commands for different use cases. And the biggest flag is red flag is adding Boolean flags on commands. That's one pitfall. Then I'm going to talk about one more. I'm going to quickly go over that. If you work in legacy, then you don't have this nice structure. So you might be tempted to create a command somewhere deep down in the spaghetti code. And I would argue, since it's a service, since we want to go to a service layer, don't add it deep down in your legacy, because then it's not a layer anymore, you're just putting it in between the core of your application. So create something else there, an abstraction, and at a later point, if you're far enough, you can actually do that in the controller or whatever front script you have running. So I think that's basically it. Thank you for listening. Before I take questions, I was asked to tell about this. We at Made with Love, if you enjoy talks like this, or we do workshops like this, technical ones, but also soft skills ones, or about project management and stuff like that, you can visit that. So that's it. Thank you for listening. Any questions?
So for me, I'm a PHP developer newbie. So
okay, sure.
Stupid question. So
there are no stupid questions.
So you said, well, this, in the beginning, this is an introduction to the command bus. I personally didn't know what to expect.
Okay.
So the real purpose for the command bus is, looks to me, is like to restructure the way your application is built up. make it more manageable or extensible or what?
Yeah, it does a
Can you
few
repeat the
things.
question before?
Oh, okay,
What is the main
no.
purpose? What is the main
Okay,
purpose?
yeah, what's the main purpose of the command bus? I already was thinking about my answer. So it does a few things, like indeed it abstracts away, it avoids duplication, definitely of domain logic in your controllers, which you would never want. Yeah, it's the thing about the service pattern I talked about, the service layer pattern I talked about. It creates this divide between your input layers and the core of your application. It can be used to separate from your framework as well, so you would only use framework stuff in the UI side and not in the core side. Stuff like that. It's actually a pattern to indeed help structuring your application. Yeah.
And also with Laravel, you can dispatch them to job queue, so they run async. Your application becomes a bit faster.
Yeah. So you can indeed, Laravel has indeed that you can handle them async.
Symfony does that.
Symfony does that too?
The messenger component.
Okay. I wanted to mention the messenger component, but Jeroen told me not to because because I never worked in Symfony. But I thought that messenger was a command bus for Symfony. But it is.
It's more than.
Yeah, you can also. Yeah. I would argue you can. Yeah, I need to go in a deep example, I think, to explain this. But if you are, for example, importing contacts. You might want to put that on a queue, for example, and your contact handler in the beginning it sets it adds an import model and sets that to processing. The problem is between that you dispatch this and it gets picked up, your interface needs to change, for example, but your import will not be on processing yet. So what I tend to do with processes is make a start import command, which just sets the import on processing, that's synchronous. Then dispatch a process import asynchronous. So that's something I tend to do, like to do for asynchronous commands. Yeah.
If an error occurs in the handler, how would the front end where you dispatch it?
Yeah.
How do you handle that?
So yeah, if it's not asynchronous, with of course you just wrap it in try catch block.
Yeah.
That's what we do. Yeah, that's basically it. There is this thing that people say you cannot return stuff from a command, from a command bus. But I think it's like as long as you're not doing CQRS, you can return whatever you want. So applications exceptions are fine as well. So. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Maarten. So for our second lightning talk, we have Serkan Yildiz. He works at PHP Limburg. He will give a talk about Symfony 4.3 and the cool new stuff that's been added. Yeah. Give a round of applause for Serkan.
Close that website.